Hello there, and welcome to episode 12 of the Or So She Says podcast. My name is Narissa Shea, and I am a personal trainer, nutritionist, sport and exercise psychology consultant, yoga instructor, and a professional Irish dancer. I'm actually really nervous for this episode today, and I think it's because when I was doing the show notes, there was a lot of stuff that I included that I was like, I actually have never said this out loud, and I've never told anyone some of this. So some of this is very, very raw. But with the week that's in it, today's episode is going to be all about mental health. And it's worth pointing out straight off the bat that I am not an expert in this area. I am just merely talking about the one thing in this life that I am fully qualified to talk about, and that is my own journey. So in this solo episode, I'm going to discuss World Mental Health Day. And personally, I think every day should be World Mental Health Day. But anyway, I'm also going to talk about my own personal experience with mental health, the real reason why I have recently decided to give up the drink. Plot twist, it entails mental health. And I'm going to finish off with some of my top tips for staying on top of my own mental health. Before I get into this, I'm going to do a couple of trigger warnings here. Firstly, if this is your first time listening to my podcast, I probably don't recommend this being the first episode you listen to, mainly because there's going to be a lot of harsh truths in this that don't really come across as something that I usually say or my usual response to things. So maybe if you want to start with another episode where I'm usually more of a positive Polly, you'll get more of a feel of what I'm actually like on podcasts. But today we are not going to be doing positive Polly, Narissa, because I think what's really important is I get messages all the time. How do you stay so motivated? How are you so positive all the time? X, Y, and Z. Oh, this is great to see. But ultimately, sometimes I'm like, whoa, is this actually helping people? Like, do you actually think I'm fucking positive Polly all the time? Because I'm not. And do you think I'm motivated all the time? Because I'm not. Because therefore, I'm giving off a mixed message that people should feel this way at certain times, or people should feel this way all the time. And I think it's worth pointing out straight away that we all go through periods of low times in our life, and we all go through periods where we're not feeling so positive, and that's very important to point out this week. But it's equally important to point out, like, I'm not motivated all the time as well. So I'm getting a little bit concerned that the message I'm giving off online is that I'm motivated and positive all the time. Please know I am not, especially for the days that are in it. Day 17 and 18 of my cycle this week. It's ironic that I am recording these episodes on these days because these are what I would call my stabby days of my cycle. But there's a couple of trigger warnings in here also, because I'm going to say a couple of things from my own experience. And what I say is probably going to trigger a couple of people. And I really want you to understand that sometimes when we get triggered by what someone says, and believe me, this happens to me all the time, when someone says something and it really, really triggers me, it actually makes me take a step back and be like, why is this triggering me so much? And usually it's triggering me because it's resonating with me and it's bringing something to the surface that I don't actually really want to face. So just consider that with some of the things I'm saying today. Again, I'm not a professional in this area. Like, I'm just talking about my own experience and my own journey. But I think when people see my journey, they're going to be shocked, especially if you're someone who's just recently started following me or you only have met me in the last few years. Some of this is going to be very eye-opening for you. But I want to be honest, because if I'm honest about this story and people can see the way I am now, maybe they see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel if they're going through a bit of a dark period in their life also. So we're going to start off today. What is mental health? Okay, so mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. It is an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world we live in. Mental health is a basic human right, and it is crucial to personal, community, and socioeconomic development. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but I think that summarizes it really well, that it's not just feeling good. It's like our ability to handle stress, our ability to learn new skills and work well with people and actually be a part of a community. Like it encompasses everything. And I think mental health has sometimes fallen into the bracket of I feel good and I don't feel good. And that's not really what it's about. Like we all go through down times and feel sad and potentially feel a little bit depressed. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later about labeling things as feeling as opposed to it being an identity. But it's also important to realize that it encompasses so much more than just how we are feeling. It encompasses like that relationship to people in our community, people in our lives, our ability to actually, be part of society and handle the life stresses that are thrown on all of us. Unfortunately, like even though stress is like the number one cause of nearly every single disease on this planet, it is in some way, shape, or form linked to, we can in some way, shape, or form impact our ability to handle stress. And I think that's something that all of us could really, really do it, myself included. In 2018, Mental Health Ireland surveyed a sample of Irish people asking their attitudes towards mental health and recovery. So they found, right, that on average, women have a lower well-being score than men. Those who are younger, on average, scored lower on the well-being scale than those who are older. And on average, those who are unemployed and those who are full-time homemakers actually had a lower score than those who are in full-time or part-time employment. Here's another report that I found crazy, shocking. Like the Health at a Glance report reported that Ireland has one of the highest rates of mental health illness in Europe, with 18.5% of the population recorded as having a mental health illness such as anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression, or alcohol drug use. This was a study carried out, by the way, in 2016. Fast forward a few years to actually a study that was carried out online this year by Amaric Research. And they found that with a sample of 1,200 adults, they carried this out between April 28th to May 4th of 2023, okay? They revealed high rates of depression and anxiety in Ireland, with 60% of those surveyed experiencing depression and 80% experiencing anxiety. They also found that a diagnosis is more likely for females and those aged between 25 and 44. And they also found 1 in 10 respondents under 25 years of age believe they are currently experiencing depression. So pretty shocking stats, I think. Yes, no. However, I pose this question. Do I think the higher number among young people could also be down to that lean in society towards more social acceptance of mental disorders? Yes. Okay. I think in later years, or in the most recent years, should I say, the ability for people to actually come forward and talk about mental health has definitely increased. Like people are more open about discussing it. So do I think that it makes sense that maybe younger people are a little bit more able to talk about their struggles? Yes. I don't know about you, but I think of like the older generation of like baby boomers, maybe before that, like the idea of going to a therapist, they'd be like, I'm not going to see a shrink. I'm fine. Everything's grand. Everyone's always fine. Everyone's grand. And if someone did have a mental disorder, they'd be classed as like, oh, they're just not all there. And just kind of, that was it. That was all that was said. And I think in this day and age, people are more open about talking about their own mental struggles, which I think is amazing. And I also think because of technology, which I'm not going to say is all negative or all positive, more people are aware of the symptoms of depression and the symptoms of anxiety disorders and the symptoms of ADHD. They're more aware of the symptoms, so they can kind of like notice these patterns in family and friends, maybe in themselves. But also, I think with this rise in technology, do I think that this has maybe also impacted higher levels of anxiety and depression? Like, I think I was the last generation of people to grow up without social media. To any young people listening, that makes me sound so old. But my age group, so I would be 33 at the minute. I'm turning 34 next month. But I didn't have Bebo until I was 16. And I think MSN Messenger might have been around a little bit before that, but that was it. And like you were talking about like dial-up fucking internet that took ages to load one page. Like I remember having to take photos with my camera and get them printed out, and then I would scan them and then I would upload them one at a time to my social media. Like that's how slow we're talking. So I mean, the amount of information we were actually receiving through social media channels back in the day would have been very limited, mainly because like the internet was so slow. But you're talking about having everything at your fingertips now. And most children, everyone, like they're on TikTok and stuff like that. Like our brain is taking in so much more than we even realize in any given second. And I think can be kind of scary as well. Like, and there was a study done where they found the increased usage kind of effects on brain functioning that will compromise sleep and cognitive abilities and develop risk for certain mental illnesses, including but not limited to depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease, and attention deficit slash hyperactive disorder. So do I think this increase is due to more people talking openly about mental illness, or is it actually rising potentially because of technology, because of everything? I honestly think it's a bit of both. I do genuinely believe it's a bit of both. Like, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher in this area. If you're someone who's a researcher in this area and you have more definitive answers, I'd love to hear from you. But my personal opinion is, from teaching in schools and teaching classes, do I think children's attention span has gone to shit? Yes. Like, what is the common denominator along this is usually like short form videos, things like that. And our ability to be present and actually pay attention to things, in my opinion, really, really determines the quality of life we have. If we can't focus on one thing, we're going to struggle. We're constantly thinking about the next thing we need to do. And I know for a fact my concentration has gotten way worse since I've become an iPhone wanker. And to be honest, like I was actually saying to my boyfriend last night, you would not believe if I told you that years ago when I was living in Spain, I dropped my phone, my shitty phone, down the toilet. And I just went without a phone for a couple of weeks and it did not bother me. This wasn't even that long ago. This was like 4 years ago or something. But then I launched my business and I work online. So I'm always bet to my phone. Like I take 2 days off social media a week. I try to take 2 days off. I make sure I take 1 day off. And actually, that's probably one of my top tips for dealing with your own mental health, is actually to just take a full day off social media a week. Offload your apps. That's my biggest piece of advice. Don't go on them, because you'll automatically go to click in them. I actually offload all my apps for a whole day and it's glorious and I feel amazing after it. I'm so much more present that day. But I think something that we have to become very, very aware of is, even though with this rise in technology and this increase in readily available information about diagnostics and all this stuff, it's incredible. But none of this comes without some repercussions. And I think the rise in levels of ADHD and attention related disorders, and myself personally, sometimes I catch myself and I am like watching telly with my phone in my hand on the fucking laptop and I'm like, what are you actually doing? Like, you are 3 ways splitting your concentration now. Focus on one fucking task. And it's like really, really getting to a point now where all of us are falling in the trap of this, and it's not good for our mental health. Like, we're not built to do this. Anyway, so in my opinion, I think this rise could potentially be a little bit of both, right? It could be down to the increased use of technology and stuff like that, which I don't necessarily always think is all a bad thing. But I also think the rise could potentially be due to the fact that more people are talking about it now, which is a good thing. But that's my own opinion, okay? And my one issue with this is, and I've spoken to quite a few people about this, because I have even noticed in my own coaching intakes the rise in mid 20-year-olds being diagnosed with ADHD in later life. And I was actually chatting to someone the other day, and I was saying, like, we can be diagnosed with all these things, but you have to decide whether this diagnosis is going to become an identity for you. Because if you allow it become an identity for you, you're going to struggle to see a way through it. It's just always going to be a burden you have to carry. And that's not to say I am not here to talk about clinical depression and clinical anxiety disorder, okay? I'm talking about the ability to know the difference between I am feeling anxious, which is completely normal, okay? I am feeling depressed, which is also completely normal, and saying, I am depressed, I am anxious. When you label these things, I say this all the time to clients. I'm like, if you keep saying, I am fat, you are going to believe it, and it's going to become your identity. If you say, I feel fat, it's something you can do something about, and it is not a fixed trait of your personality. And I think with this rise in talking about anxiety and depression, there needs to also be a rise in allowing people to understand that it's okay to feel anxious and feel depressed, and that everyone feels it at some point. Yes, to more extremes. Some people may sway more on the side of feeling depressed, and some may feel more swayed on the side of anxiety. I am definitely someone who sways more towards anxiety. But I'm also very aware that I'm not labeling myself, I am anxious. I'm saying I feel anxious. And at certain times of the month, and at certain times of the year, and at certain times in life, I feel more anxious. Now, this is where it starts getting a little bit more personal. And I'm actually going to chat about my own experience with mental health. And this is a story that I am very, very qualified to talk about. And people working in the mental health sector might hate me for this. I don't know. But like, once again, as I'm saying, if I can help more people than I offend in this episode, then that is my goal. And if I do offend anyone, that is not my intention either. I think we know at this stage, if you followed me or you listen to my podcast, my goal is always to help as many people as possible, to educate and empower as many people as possible. I never want to piss people off. I'm not the next fitness trainer who gets kicks out of pissing people off online and it's good for the algorithm. Like, that's not who I am. But my own experience with mental health has been a very, very rocky one, especially up until probably the last few years, to be honest. So, all growing up, I would have coined myself a perfectionist. And by the way, I wore this as a badge of honor, a fucking badge of honor. People would tell me I was a perfectionist. I would constantly be told by people I respected and looked up to that I was a perfectionist and that that was a great thing. But somewhere along the line, that perfectionist mentality got so crippling, and I saw so much pressure to be perfect all the time that I kind of developed some really, really fucking fucked up traits when I think back on it now. I would say back in my teens, maybe my late teens, and by the way, no one knows about this. So even my mom is going to be listening to this and she's like, I didn't even know this about you. I started developing really, really obsessive things. Now, I don't know the official diagnostic requirements for OCD, so I'm not going to say that. But all I'll say is, them people you see on the telly who flick light switches on and off and on and off and on and off, that was me. I was doing that. I was having to like do things a certain amount of times. Usually 7 was my number, 7. Like on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, right? And by the way, I had myself fully believed in my head that if I did not do these things, something was going to happen. Like, I had this crazy narrative in my head. If you don't do that light switch 7 times, X is going to happen or Y is going to happen. I firmly believed it. So I did it, right? Another thing I used to do, I actually would get like extremely uncomfortable if someone was in a car and they had the volume on an uneven number. Now, I know we laugh about these things. I don't know about you, but me and my friends used to laugh about these things. I'd be like, ha, put it on an even number. And I was like, in my head, I was like, no, seriously, put it on a fucking even number. Like, I'm about to lose my life in the back here. This obsession with things being in order and this need to control everything. Like, it was obsessive. And then another thing that I used to do, and like my friends laugh about this and I laugh about it now, but actually when I think back on it, it was really fucked up. I had to kiss my dancing shoes when I put them on and when I took them off, or I was like, you're going to fuck up all your dances. Now, at the time, I didn't think anything of these, right? Because it was the way my mind worked. Like, I was very obsessive. I would overthink everything. And I was like borderline OCD with things. Like, I would obsess. And if it wasn't done, like, if I didn't kiss my shoes when I took them off, I would put them back on and then take them and kiss them. Like, and I would do this at fetches like a psychopath. I'd have to try and do it on the sly. And there was other things that I remember, like there was so many things, and I don't really remember them all now. But the other thing was I had to leave the temperature in the shower on an exact setting. It always had to be on 30 when I got out. So I'd have my shower or whatever, but when I was actually getting out of the shower, I had to have it on this specific number. And I honestly didn't think anything of this, but now I think back on it, I'm like, oh my God, like your need to control things and this obsession and this rumination, like I despised making mistakes, right? Despised making mistakes. I could not deal with being wrong. And I used to laugh at it, and my mom was just like, oh yeah, you're pig-headed and you're stubborn and blah, 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 blah. And like now when I look back on it, having done all the research and the study that I have done in recent years into all of this, I'm like, no, that wasn't me not able to make mistakes. That was me genuinely ruminating on one mistake I potentially made while reading out something in class. I would think about it all day and I would sweat when I thought about the mistake. Like the sweat would pour out of me if I thought back on what I did. And like, being younger, like dealing with teenage years and everything, and dealing with being someone who was doing really well in a competitive sport like dancing, I became obsessed with this notion that making mistakes was in some way, shape, or form going to ruin my life. Like, so it makes sense when I think back on it now that I got really obsessed with all these things I could control, like the light switches and things like that. It made sense because I had control over them when there was things in my life I felt like I had no control over. So I'm not gonna lie, being younger and being in my own fucking head was actually so fucking exhausting. Like exhausting. And I actually just want to give younger Narissa a big hug and actually just talk to her, because all of these things that were going on in my head, I think when you're younger as well, you genuinely think everyone thinks the same way as you. So I just did. I presumed everyone thought the way I did. And I would obsess over things. And if I got an idea in my head, oh, that was real. And that definitely happened. And I would construct scenarios in my head that were absolutely outrageous, but I'd have myself fully convinced they had happened. Whether that be something with my friend, something with my boyfriend at the time, I was fully convinced it had happened, right? And I would obsess over it, right? So it makes sense then that when I started drinking when I was 14, I remember getting drunk for the first time. It was my 14th birthday, which is quite prophetic because this is now coming up to my 34th birthday and I've decided to quit. It's 20 years. It's mad to think it's been 20 years. But it made sense then that this escape that I just wanted from thinking and obsessing, it became such a release. It really, really did. Like getting really, really fucked up at the weekends. Now, I wasn't drinking all that much when I was 14. I'd say I started drinking a lot when I was like 16. But when I was 14, I discovered this thing that could take you out of your own head, and you did all this mad shit and you thought it was great. And think back on it now, it wasn't great at all. It was fucking disgraceful. But it was just an escape from my own brain. Oh my God, it was such a release. And I think when you're younger, when you're drinking as well, like even the next day, because you don't really get hangovers, it was just funny to be hungover because you're still kind of drunk and you're going along the day and you're like, haha, I have no responsibilities, everything's fine. And I think that's where it kind of spiraled for me, because I was never someone who was able to have one or two drinks. I'll talk about moderation later, but it just became like this way of stopping my own thoughts, because fuck me, it was exhausting being in my head when I was younger. It really, really was. Like when I think about it now and how my brain is wired, but I've helped it a lot in recent years. Like neuroplasticity is a thing, guys. Look it up. It's amazing. You can change how your brain is wired. But back then, I just think I just want to hug little Narissa because I was like, oh my God, girl, like those thoughts in your head were not normal. Like they were crazy. I don't like using the term crazy, sorry, but you know what I mean when I'm getting at here. And another thing is, like, just to go back, I'm not going to talk too much about this because honestly, it's not my place to talk about, but there's a lot of family history of mental illness in my family and anxiety and depression. And people very, very close to me, by the way, dealing with very, like, we're talking clinical anxiety, clinical depression here, okay? Not just feeling anxious, feeling depressed. I'm talking clinical level depression and anxiety and mental disorders. So if I was to allow myself to fall into the trap of believing that genetics is a, like it's your path laid out for you, and that if your parents did this or your grandparents did this or your family did this, then you're going to obviously experience this as well, then I would have been fucked. Right? Because there was all these signposts posting to this anyway, and yet I then was also seeing people I loved having like nervous breakdowns and stuff like that and having to be hospitalized. And then all this was going on in my head. But I just thought, oh, this is normal. So it made sense that I wanted that escape. And that escape for me was partying hard. Okay. So that was all fun and games ish. Not really. It was actually a shit show. When I think back on the stories that I thought were funny and hilarious and like absolute carnage, when I think of them now, they actually were really, really sad. Like some of them situations I ended up in when I was like blackout drunk that I thought were funny at the time, they weren't funny at all. They were actually really, really sad. And it makes me really, really sad to think about them now. A lot of things here, don't get me wrong, I had a great time. I was a big, big party girl and I had a great time most of the time. But a lot of the time we think that we have these incredible memories with people and we bonded over all this stuff, but a lot of the time it's just a drunken haze. And I'm like, where was the actual connection? Anyway, I'll get onto that later. But things were going moderately okay. Like I was still probably in the height of my party era. I was still in the height of my party area. Ugh. Still in the height of my party era. But then something changed in my late 20s. Now, a lot of people talk about these changes that happen in the brain every 7 years, which makes sense because this was probably around me turning 28. That all of a sudden, and I remember it so fucking clearly, right? I don't even think I'd been out the night before or anything. So I couldn't even blame that. But I was sitting in my back garden and I can't remember, someone was with me anyway. And I don't know if we were having a heated discussion or what it was, but all of a sudden my heart started racing and everything got really blurry. And I just felt this complete loss of control. Like all these things, I've been trying to fucking hold my shit together for the 27 years of my life, control everything in my life. I just couldn't even control my own body at this stage. I had a panic attack for the first time. I thought I was going to have a stroke. I thought I was actually having a heart attack. I was like, what is this feeling? My heart was racing and I had no control over it. And actually, I do remember now because my ex-boyfriend was outside with me and he had experienced panic attacks before. And I remember him actually saying to me, you need to breathe. And I remember him trying to get me to do deep breaths. And I was like, okay, okay, okay. The minute that happened, the minute I experienced my first panic attack, that was it. Game over. Because if you've had a panic attack, you know for a fact the most panicking thing you can conceive is the thought of having another panic attack, which ironically brings on another panic attack. But it was this, the thing I feared the most was I was completely losing control of my body. And it was terrifying. Like, it was absolutely terrifying. That one thing that I thought I did have control over was my body. And yet, here I was not even able to control that. And then my mind was going, you're going to have another panic attack. You're going to have another panic attack. Oh, and then the whole time you're worrying, am I going to have a panic attack? And that's nearly as bad as having a panic attack. And I think a lot of the time we think the panic attack is brought on by something that just happened to us. But a lot of the time, it's not really that. It's kind of, that's the bubble at the surface. like we have two sides to our nervous system. We have the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. One of them is fight or flight, and the other one is rest and digest. And most of us are going around stressed and in fight or flight all the time. And when we are in that fight or flight state, cortisol, our stress hormone, remains high. It makes sense then that we can be triggered by certain things and all of a sudden we're having a panic attack. And what I can kind of understand from this is back years ago in caveman times, when you needed to run away from a bear, it made sense that when fight or flight kicked in, you had all of that rush of cortisol and adrenaline to fucking run away from that bear or fight that bear. But in this day and age, we have all these stresses that aren't actually stresses. So we have all this rise in cortisol and adrenaline, but actually there's no bear in front of us. So our body's reacting the only way they can. Your heart is racing, the sweat is coming out, you have all this adrenaline, but there's nothing in front of you that's terrifying. And all of a sudden you're having a panic attack, and that becomes the bear. And a lot of the time, though, like maybe a situation does bring it on, but ultimately, I firmly believe that it is a culmination of a lot of things, and our bodies always keep the score. And usually, a final port of call is an injury, it's a sickness, or it's a panic attack. It's your body's way of just trying to come back to homeostasis. Like you've got this rise in cortisol, adrenaline, all this stuff. That's just its way of dealing with it. So, anyway, this kind of continued on for a little while, and then I was getting panic attacks quite regularly, actually. And then I went back on tour, and I ended up getting into a new relationship, and we were all having such good crack. And they went away, actually, for a while. And I was fully convinced then that the panic attacks were due to a situation that I was in at the time and not an underlying issue. So this went on for a little while, and things were grand, and it went on actually for a couple of months, and things were great. It was in the honeymoon period, and the panic attacks kind of went away, and then we ended up working somewhere not in the best environment again. And all of a sudden I noticed something really, really strange. I noticed that drinking was bringing on this really weird feeling, and it started becoming the hangovers weren't hangovers anymore, right? It wasn't like, oh, I have a headache and I feel sick, because by God, if you've experienced crippling anxiety, you know for a fact you would take the headache and the feeling sick over the anxiety any day, right? But I just had this constant feeling of being on edge, and it started that cycle again of reminding me of that feeling that I was constantly potentially going to have a panic attack. And that's what it felt like. And I started putting two and two together and realizing that this was coming on after I drank all the time. I love this phrase because at the time I was like, what is the solution to this? I will drink more. That will make this better. Because you think it's going to take away that feeling. And people be like, hair of the dog, hair of the dog. And then I saw a phrase recently and I was like, oh my God, that is the definition of what it is. The hair of the dog that bit you. The hair of the dog that bit you in the fucking first place. So all you're doing really when you do hair of the dog is kicking the can further down the road. But anyway, so at this stage, I've been drinking since I was 14. And I was around 27, 28 now. And all of a sudden I started realizing that this anxiety feeling was fucking killing me. Like it was killing me. It was to the point where I would do anything to just genuinely have a headache or feel sick over this feeling. But when I think back on it now, although yes, I completely understand the mechanisms behind why this was happening, which by the way, I'm not going to get into, but if you listen to Huberman's episode on alcohol, or you listen to Annie Grace's podcast, she'll talk all about the science and the neuroscience behind this. It comes down to really, when you first drink, you get like that sedative effect. You have that first glass of wine, it gives you that sedative effect. But the longer you're drinking, the more your body knows it needs to kick in earlier to counteract this, because alcohol is poison. Essentially, it is. If you drank pure ethanol, you'd be dead. Like, so it treats it like a poison. So in order to get back to homeostasis, it releases I can't remember the name of the thing. But anyway, what this does essentially is it's going to higher your cortisol levels. It's also going to increase like stimulants and stuff. So it makes sense then, if you've ever experienced this, why after a night of drinking, you're waking up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Because the sedative effect of the alcohol is weared off, but now you're just left with the stimulant part. And that's the part that's actually causing the anxiety. There's so much science behind this. And actually, on one of my next podcasts, I actually want to get someone on who is actually like a wizard in this area. I have a couple of people in mind that I want to get on, but they will talk all through the science of anxiety and all these things, because it's so fucking interesting. It's actually so interesting how our body actually processes alcohol. But it's worth pointing out, by the way, that no one had a fucking clue that I was feeling like this. Once again, kept it to myself. I just presumed, maybe this is just this new phase where it's just this new hangover I have to deal with, and maybe I'll get over it in time. And then fast forward like a year, and I was working another contract that I was very unhappy in. And this is where it gets really, really dark, because actually this is something I never told anyone. Didn't even tell my boyfriend at the time. But we were all out on a night out. I'm not going to say where, because if I say where, there's going to be people that'll know who I'm talking about, and they'll know that they were there, and they're going to feel really bad then. I didn't actually just talk to them about it. But I was on just this random night out, and I remember just being so unhappy. Like, I was sculling the drinks that night, and it was a pretty mad night anyway. Like, everyone was absolutely hammered, like. But I remember coming back vaguely, and then I remember waking up the next day, obviously fully clothed, and I just looked over at the dressing table, and I remember seeing a rake of like painkillers there. Now, obviously, I fell asleep. I didn't do anything. I didn't take them, right? But obviously, that dark fucking thought crossed my mind when I was in that blackout drunk state, and I scared the fucking shit out of myself. That's how much I just didn't want to be in my own head, or in that situation in life in general where I was. But anyway, of course, didn't tell anyone about this, kept it to myself, and just plowed on, and then left that contract. And again, I was blaming the situation and not getting to the underlying issue. And I went and I did a different contract, and I had a great time, and I forgot about it again. But I still couldn't drink. Like, this was the thing for me. Like, I couldn't drink anymore. Like, as in, I was drinking, but the feeling the next day was nearly triggering panic attacks all the time. But then at the time, actually, I wasn't getting panic attacks. I'd managed to kind of find this trick where if I just walked loads, I actually would stop it. But like, I mean, no matter how hungover I was pounding the fucking pavements. Like, I would just be out walking and walking for hours. And then eventually I'd tire myself out, come home and go to bed at like 7 o'clock. And then the day would be done. I'd be like, thank God. But the thing about it is like, it did scare me a little bit. Like, I was actually starting to get like scared to drink. Like, I was scared about like this person that was coming out when I was drinking. Not that I was ever violent. Like, everyone thought I was great crack on the beer. But these thoughts that had started going through my head when I was drinking, I was like, what the fuck? Anyway, so then COVID hit. And to be honest, COVID is probably the thing that saved my life, because it made me change my whole entire life. It made me question everything. And a lot of things happened during COVID that, to be honest, I don't know what path I'd be on today if it didn't happen. Anyway, so COVID hit, and for the first while, it was actually grand. We were just having the crack, loads of barbecues and stuff like that. It was so much fun. Probably some of the best quality time I spent with like my mom and dad in so long. And I was actually home and didn't feel bad about not having a contract, because everyone was out of work. So I actually like had a really good time. But then eventually I got kind of bored, and I was like, look, this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So I'm going to go back, do my personal training qualification. Then I got into nutrition, and all during this while, I started doing yoga. Mainly I did yoga for the physical benefits at the start, to be honest. I was injured, so I couldn't dance and I couldn't really do much. So I remember thinking, oh, I'll get into yoga. Loads of people were getting into yoga during COVID, so it seemed like the right thing to do was just get into yoga. Adrian's 30-day challenge, right? But something happened during that 30-day challenge, and it was quite profound. And I can't actually remember what day it happened on, but all of a sudden, something just clicked with me where I was just like, wow, like I literally have not stopped to actually just maybe listen to the thoughts that are coming, realize that I'm not the thoughts, but also I was so in tune with my body, I was listening to my body as well for the first time in my whole life. And that like psychosomatic relationship and all, like that's a thing, like, right? So I was like, wow, all of a sudden, like, I started feeling all these mental and physical benefits from actually just slowing down and getting more into my body. And I started kind of falling in love with myself a little bit and being a lot more kind to myself. Like, I started realizing, like, oh my God, like, when you have these crazy intrusive thoughts, like, you know, you're not them thoughts and you are above them thoughts. And that's something that meditation has literally opened my eyes to. And my issue, really, to be honest, with going to doctors and stuff like that is, and I think everyone should go to doctors if they have any issues. GPs are amazing. But something that really annoys me is over the years, Mom has been to so many doctors and she goes with these things. And I was like, out of curiosity, did the doctor ask you like how your stress levels are? What's your food like? Are you eating a good bit of fruit and vegetables? Are you eating enough protein? Like, what are your stress levels like? Your sleep like? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you exercising? Like, they don't ask these. So, what I will argue here is, you know, if you're taking a pill, but you're not looking after your body and mind, you're putting a plaster over a broken leg. And what I mean by this is, I'll talk a little bit about my tools at the end, right? But I can tell you one thing before I go on to the next part of this. I will outright attest that if I do not do these things, and what I mean by that is look after my body and mind, meditation, yoga, weight training, exercise, getting out in nature, walking, eating good food, eating my fruit and vegetables, watching what I'm consuming and stuff online, I guarantee you, knowing how my brain was wired all through my life, if I wasn't doing these and I was drinking loads, I wasn't doing any exercise, I was sitting at a desk all day, I was smoking, I was doing drugs, I was doing all these things, right? If I was doing all of this, I guarantee you I'd be sat in that doctor's office going, give me a fucking pill to get rid of this, please. Because I know the way my mind would go if I did that. So, my little trigger warning here is I get that in the rise of people saying they have anxiety and depression, and I'm not disregarding that. But are you doing everything in your power to look after your body and mind? Because do that. And then if you still need the pills, then yes, get the pills by all means. Like, fucking pills have saved lives. But taking a pill while not looking after your body and mind is putting a fucking plaster over a broken leg. And I know that for a fact, because if I don't do these things, my mind goes back to that dark place that it was in. And I know how fucking dark it got. But I also know that I pulled myself out of that. But given my family history, had I gone to the doctor with all of this going on, they would have given me some pills for anxiety, I'd say. But I didn't want that. Because in my opinion, I was like, am I actually doing everything I possibly can to look after my body and mind? Because if I am and I still need the pills, then yes. But if I'm eating shit food, eating takeaways all the time, drinking loads, and by drinking loads, by the way, that could actually just be one binge a week, okay? Because essentially it takes nearly like 72 hours for your body to actually clear all the alcohol out. So you're still feeling the effects. Am I not exercising? Am I getting any fresh air and daylight? Like, all of these things. If I was saying no to all of these, then I'd be like, I'm not even giving my fucking mind a fighting chance here, right? And that's really empowering. And it can be hurtful to hear, because most of us in this day and age want a quick fix. Because by God, doing all of this is hard work, and it does take time, and it's not going to happen overnight, right? It took me years to get to the point where I am really, really honestly can say, hand on my heart, happy. But it's worth it. I promise you that it's worth it, because it's real. And the happiness I feel is genuinely real. it's not artificially real. Okay. So this kind of brings me on. I know I've touched on it a little bit and I'm not going to talk too much about it because I am not an expert in this area. But one of the real reasons why I have actually decided to give up the drink is because the cons of drinking started to outweigh the pros. So we all know at this stage alcohol is depressant, right? So I don't think I'm like boggling people's brains when I talk about this, right? And it does not relax you. You think it does, but it doesn't. That first drink is where you think it's relaxing you because of the sedative effects. But I want you to know that your body is kicking in straight away to get rid of that. And therefore, it's going to cause a rise in cortisol, which is stress hormone, right? I'm going to knock another thing on the head, right? Most people think they can moderate, but actually, it's extremely difficult. I want you to know this because if you're someone like me who thought it was just a me problem that I couldn't go for one or two, it's actually extremely difficult to moderate. And scientists have actually proven this, right? Because of how actually alcohol affects the brain. And I'm not here to bash on and say, don't drink, do drink. I don't really care. Not being bad, I don't really care. Like, I've chosen to not to. And that's my journey and that's my path. And if people want to talk to me about this, if they're concerned and they want a hand to hold and someone to chat to about it, then I'm all ears. But I'm also not here to tell any adults in this world what to do. But once again, I'm talking about what I've researched and my own experience, right? There is a reason why you can't moderate, and it's usually down to the actual effects that drink has on the brain when you start drinking, okay? And the thing about it is we laugh about this. We think this is fucking hilarious, right? That we can't go for one or two. I will go for one or two, but it's never one or two. And we're like, ha. And I do this. I used to laugh about this. I was like, ha, yeah, but it's never one or two, right? And we laugh about it like it's hilarious, right? But actually, like, is that not really bad that if we say we're going to do something, we can't stick to it? It's funny, right? Because alcohol is the only drug in this world that you actually have to justify why you don't take it more than you actually have to justify that you do, especially in Ireland, right? But the funny thing about it is if I actually went to the gym, right, and I said, I'm going to go to the gym for an hour, and I ended up spending 3 hours there, and I confessed to my friend, I was like, I said I was going to do 1 hour, and I ended up doing 3, I just couldn't leave there. She'd be like, I think you have a problem. I think you're obsessed with exercise. And people would actually say that. But if you said I'm going for one or two, but I ended up 2 bottles of wine deep in the pub, people would be like, ha, sure, you can't go for one or two. Like, no one can do one or two. And I'm like, it's actually mind boggling. But anyway, like, I think what we need to realize is you don't actually need to be homeless on a park bench to be an alcoholic. And I know before I started researching all of this, the only thing I ever saw as a path for people who had a drink problem was like, you're an alcoholic, you go to AA and 12 steps and that's it. But like, a lot of people are waking up in this world to the fact, especially the Gen Zs and stuff of this world, like they're actually drinking a lot less. And I think it's really empowering to be like, hold on a minute, like, I can absolutely consider myself to have an issue with drinking alcohol and not be an alcoholic. Like someone said to me recently, but if you can go for a few drinks every couple of weekends and you're not an alcoholic, then why do you feel the need to stop? And I was like, right, okay, well, here you go. Do you want to know my reasons why? And I journaled on this, okay? When the cons of anything start outweighing the pros, it's a no for me. Now, a perfect example of this is the last night I went out drinking. And I've actually noticed this a lot over the last while, and it comes and goes, but it's gotten really, really frequent lately before I stopped drinking. And I put a poll up on Instagram the other day to ask people what their favorite part of drinking was going out. Was the start, the middle, or the end, or the build up? And you know what? Most people said the build up and the start, and some people said the middle, and the odd person said the end, back at a house party or whatever. And a lot of that is probably down to that connection they feel when you're back at a house party and you're fucked and you think everyone's your best friend. Like, that's my personal interpretation of why I loved house parties. It's that connection you think you have with people when you're absolutely off your fucking tits. But actually, when you think about it, you're like, if my whole relationship with someone revolves around me needing to be absolutely fucking hammered, that says a lot about the relationship. Anyway, so back to it. I was out and I went out with the girls. And the start of the night, before we actually went out, we were all just sitting talking in the room. And before we started drinking. And I loved it. I loved it. Like there was actual, I was listening, I was present, I was enjoying the conversation. We were all so excited to see each other. And then I started drinking. And then all of a sudden, I noticed all I was thinking about was the next drink. And I was like, okay. And then when I get to that level of fucking drunk, that's when I can start talking about this and this. And there was all these things in my head as to like these conditions that were going to happen throughout the night. That like when I was fucked enough, I was going to talk about these things I wanted to talk about. And when are we getting the next drink? And when are we going to the next bar? And we were ordering food and I was like, not even arse about food. I was like, come on, we'll just get on set. And then I pulled myself up on it because actually before that I decided I was going to do 90 days sober. And this was my day. I was like, fuck it, I'm not going to do it. I'll start on Monday. And you know what? I'm so glad I had that last night, that blowout, because I regretted it so much. It has launched me into a whole new light of feeling the way I do about it, where I'm just like, you had a better time that night before you started drinking. And when I started drinking, and I vividly remember this, like I was thinking about where's the next bar we're going to, when's the next drink, and going to the toilet and coming back because I pee like a racehorse when I'm drinking. And most of the night was spent then queuing up to go to the toilet. And I was just like, I wasn't present at all that day. I wasn't present. And even back in the room, I was drinking water, but actually I was like pissed off then trying to see if we could dial a drink and get some more drink for the room. And we couldn't, thank God. But I was like, oh my God, like you ruined that night, Narissa, the minute you started drinking. So for me, I've just found over the last while, drink is making me a lot less present. And I'm just not present in conversations. I'm not present in the moment. I'm just constantly thinking about the next drink or the next thing, which actually makes me sound like an alcoholic. But if anyone knows me, they'd say, no, she's not. Like she goes out once in a while and has a couple of drinks. But that thought process made me like, what the fuck? And I'm only in a position now where I can actually be like, oh, that is fucked up because of all the measures I take to look after my mental health. So when it gets to a point where my mind is functioning at a level that I don't actually really like, I question the things around it. And I'm like, well, what's the fucking common denominator here? Drink. I was like, is it actually serving me anymore? Because we think we're connecting more when we're drinking, right? We loosen up to connect, right? But a lot of what's going on is a lot of fucking talk and very little listening. And you know that if you stay somewhere after 12, people are just shouting at each other. And you're like, what? Anyway, this is not me here to bash on about it. This is just my own personal opinions and why I have decided to do this. So I'm going to finish off here with some of my top tips for staying on top of my own mental health. And I'll give you maybe some apps and stuff that I like to use. Firstly, yoga. I have already discussed this. Did I like it when I first started doing it? No, I found it so fucking boring. I hated lying in Shavasana and I hated having to stay in poses that I couldn't just keep moving. But the more I forced myself to do it, the more I forced myself to stay in the present moment, stay with the pose, stay with my breath. And there's magic in that connection because that presence is what I'm always looking for. The next thing, breath work. Mind blowing. I just find when you need to snap yourself into the present moment, it's probably one of the most powerful things, especially if you're in a state of heightened anxiety. It can be an immediate tool you can implement to bring you down to earth and calm the nervous system down. My personal favorite app for this is an app called State, State. And it has loads of different options. It has like calm, be present, sleep, all these different things, feel alert. Meditation. If you're a guided meditation person, go ham, enjoy the guided meditations. I personally like to do my breath work and then I do some silent meditation, mainly because after I've done silent meditation for about 5 minutes and I let my mind go crazy and talk about all the stuff that I need to do for the day, it eventually calms down and I eventually see the thoughts for what they are, not real. And I'm like, pfft. So when I'm having my crazy days and my thoughts are a little bit erratic, I'm able to actually have a bit of distance there to be like, you can think all these things, it doesn't make them true, right? So exercise, my personal favorites on top of yoga is weight training and swimming. Swimming, I find recently is a form of movement meditation because it's connecting your breath to the movement. I also just find weight training is probably one of the most empowering things I ever embarked on the last few years. And not only has it made my body stronger, but I firmly believe it has made my mind stronger. I eat good, nutritious food most of the time. So I'm not hanging out with the takeaways every week, right? And not because I don't love them, but because I feel like a bag of dicks after I eat a load of shite food. So therefore, if it's something, as I said, where the cons outweigh the pros, it's done. It's done for me, right? So I just prefer, like, just because you eat healthy food, it doesn't need to be not nice. I think that's really, really important. The next thing is allowing myself to feel my feelings and not run away from them. I was the queen of avoidance for a very, very, very long time. And if something was uncomfortable, I did not want to sit with it, didn't want to feel it, didn't like it. So I would avoid it. I would scroll. I would go and exercise. I would do all these things. I would go on the beer, anything but feel the feelings that I was feeling. But your feelings are guideposts. You need to listen to them. And a lot of the time when it's a recurring thing that keeps coming up, it is trying to tell you something. So sit with it and listen to it and listen to your body, because your body is keeping the score and it is telling you what you need to know. You just need to listen. The next thing is walking and getting out in nature. Like, it sounds so self-explanatory, but honestly, just being out in nature is scientifically proven to boost mental health. I also just find hiking is just a break for the soul. Hiking, have the phone on airplane mode. Do yourself a favor. Use that day when you're out hiking to be your day off social media. The world can wait to see your Instagram photos the next day, okay? That's me included, by the way. When I go on these hikes, which I usually do on a Sunday, the photos will go up on a Monday because I'm off all the socials on a Sunday. I think having a passion and a purpose in your life is really important as well. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I think this was something that really, really pushed me towards looking after my mental and physical health. Was I'm so passionate about what I do. And Tony Robbins has this thing where he's just like, I don't have fucking time to be hungover. Like, I am on a mission to do X, Y, and Z. And I just want to feel the best I possibly can. And if I have control over that, which you do, then why would I not take control over it? Human connection is really important. Like, if you struggle with making friends, or you're in a new place and you need to find friends, like, there's so much out there, and this is where technology comes in great. I've recently joined a couple of WhatsApp groups, and they're actually amazing because you meet some like-minded people, which can be really, really hard when you're older to make friends, but you have to just put yourself out there. I have loads of friends, which is one thing I'm very, very grateful for, by the way. I have so many friends all over the world, so many people I would call best friends as well, which I know not a lot of 30-something-year-olds can say, but I have definitely got more than my two hands worth of fingers of people I could call on at any given moment, who I would consider to be not just friends, not just good friends, but actually best friends, and I would tell them anything. The last thing I will say is gratitude. Oh my God, an attitude of gratitude. So important. If you can practice gratitude and just be grateful for the things you have in your life, then when more things come along, it's just an addition to your already happy life. You're not placing your happiness in the future. You're not saying, I'll be happy when I get the new car, when I get this, that, and the other. You are, I think my favorite thing to say, have this written in my journal and I look at it all the time. I am happy in the present while excited for the future. And I think that's a pretty cool place to be. I'm happy and content in the present, and I'm grateful for everything I have, but I'm also very, very excited for the future. Books. Oh my God. Like, literally read as much as you can. Like, literally read as much as you can in whatever area you want to know more about. It's changed my life. Like, the book that changed my life completely was Code of the Extraordinary Mind by Vishen Lakhiani, because he made me question everything I believed that I thought I had to do in this life. And that actually kind of brings me on to this. I put a video up about this yesterday, but this is an excerpt from a book. This journey has been an evolving one. At first, it was the story of a dead woman walking. Of all the women in this world who try to conform to a life they are told they should want, one that looks good on paper. I drank green juice and I made the right sounds when I fucked men I didn't really like, and I crushed it in the boardroom and traveled to Central America all by myself, and my ass was yoga tight. I did all the right things until all the right things became so suffocating. I wound up prostrate drunk on the floor of my apartment. It then became the journey of a woman waking up to the world and all its possibilities and wonder. her own power and voice and unique identity, the bigness that a life can be when we center it on our true desires compared to the smallness of the one we accept when we center it on the desires we're supposed to have. So I could do a whole podcast on this, and I actually did this in my talk there last week, but it talks about getting really clear on your values and actually question whether them values are values you actually value, or is it society telling you you need all these things? Because if you get all these things, you'll be happy. But then you'll get all the things and realize you're not happy, and that's when the inner work starts. So I honestly believe that presence is my motivator for things, and it's the fundamental driver behind why I do anything, because I genuinely believe your ability to be present dictates the happiness of your life. Because if you're constantly placing your happiness in the future, you're never going to be fucking happy. Like, I do all of these things because I need to do them for my mental health. And if I'm not doing them, I guarantee I'd be a walking fucking pharmacist with probably the amount of pills that a doctor would prescribe me if I harped on about it enough to her. So with that in mind, I love this poem. I'm going to finish on this poem because it's about allowing the feelings just come in and out and just how to treat them, okay? This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I just think that poem is so powerful about just feeling the feelings and not trying to suppress them. I'm going to park it there because this has been a very long episode. But if you like this episode, please, please, please subscribe to the show. Give it a star rating if you haven't already. And I think the most important thing you could do for me is actually share this episode. This episode was raw as fuck. And there was a lot of things I actually didn't think I was going to say that I actually had the balls to say. And I think it's an important message for people to hear, and especially people to hear from me, because I'm always considered to be a positive Polly. And I think this story shows you that I haven't always been like that. And it's hard work to get yourself to a point where you do see the positives in most things, but you can get there. But it doesn't happen overnight. And you have the ability to create the life you want, but you need to do the hard work and stop opting for the quick fixes. So maybe give this a share on social media and tag me, Narissa_Shea Fitness. And if you have any questions, my DMs, as always, are always open and I'm happy to help. I am not an expert in this area, but I will, of course, be able to help you if it resonates with anything I've been through before. So thank you for listening and chat to you soon.